The story begins inside a dungeon, where a huge dragon-type monster is attacking a group of human adventurers. The leader tells his subordinate to use speed boost magic. We come to know that the man using the boost magic is named Beza, a shaman from the Golden Time Guild. There are many other adventurers as well, including Lotus, who is a mage, and Saki, who is an S-class, third-ranked individual and a swordsman from the Savior's Sword Guild. Lastly, there is their leader, Conan, an S-ranked magic swordsman from the Golden Time Guild. They are all working in coordination to defeat the dragon, while the leader calls out to Yuki, telling him to stay back and hide. This is where we are introduced to our main character. Yuki is an F-ranked loser with no class or guild affiliation, who simply agrees to whatever the leader says. The high-ranking adventurers continue attacking the dragon again and again. Saki, who is as powerful as any S-rank adventurer can be, uses her skill Lumina Slash to instantly defeat the dragon in a single move. The slash creates multiple cuts across the dragon's body, leaving it lifeless on the ground in front of the victorious adventurers. Even Yuki is shocked, though he expected as much from an S-ranked adventurer, defeating a dragon so easily. Then comes the usual chatter about how the world has decayed since the disaster known as dungeons appeared. They talk about how adventurers awakened and began conquering them, but since humanity has not managed to fully clear all dungeons, dungeon breaks continue to occur. This has become a major societal problem. In this story, most adventurers only chase money, hunting profitable monsters and refusing to fully clear dungeons. Only a handful of heroes understand the danger and lead proper parties, like the Golden Time Guild, to push back against this threat. Just then, the shaman Beza approaches Yuki, verbally abusing him and telling him to hand over his share. Yuki immediately apologizes and opens his bag. The mage Lotus also begins ridiculing him, saying that she is putting her life on the line, so they deserve more. She tells Yuki that even if he is an acquaintance of Saki, they never expected such a small fry to tag along. He is the lowest-ranked rookie adventurer, has almost no mana, and is slow, making him the worst possible burden. The leader immediately steps in and tells his teammates to stop the idle chatter. He reminds them that the dungeon is estimated to be S-rank and will not clear itself, making it the last place for casual talk. Both teammates apologize. The leader then tells Yuki that if he is a member of this party, he should at least do his job properly. Yuki understands what the leader is implying. As the scene shifts, the entire team enters a dark chamber filled with fire. While Yuki travels behind them, he realizes that he lacks the awareness of a true adventurer. He had gotten too excited watching top-tier adventurers in action. Even though he wants to say that he learned a lot, the reality is that the gap between their skills is far too wide. Yuki does not even have a class to begin with. Still, Yuki is sure that someday he will become that kind of adventurer and protect everyone. Just then, Saki moves extremely close to Yuki and tells him that taking their eyes off the objective during an adventure is strictly forbidden. They must be careful, because she does not want to lose any more family. At that moment, we learn that Yuki also does not want to lose anyone else. 2 years ago, their home district was destroyed due to a dungeon break. The casualties included the orphanage where they grew up. We learn that Saki and Yuki were raised in the same orphanage, and after admiring adventurers, they left to chase their dreams. However, everyone they were supposed to return to was killed when the dungeon break destroyed everything. Yuki decided that no matter what happens, he will prevent such tragedies. Suddenly, a bat-like monster appears behind Yuki, and a sinister demon begins laughing, thinking that he has finally found the final piece of the puzzle. Yuki senses an evil presence and turns around, wondering what it is, but the bat monster is already gone. A magic circle activates beneath them, and Yuki instinctively realizes that something terrible is about to happen. He tries to warn the entire team, but it is too late. All of them are trapped inside the magic circle. The leader recognizes it as a teleportation trap and orders everyone to brace for impact. The sinister voice echoes again, welcoming the human who will change everything. The scene immediately shifts as they are transported into a massive chamber. The team looks around in confusion, wondering where they are. One of them realizes that this is the boss room. The leader orders everyone to form a circle and secure the perimeter, while Yuki is told to prepare the return item. Meanwhile, Saki tightens her grip on her sword, wondering where the boss will emerge from. But suddenly, a blood-like substance started appearing on the floor, increasing with every passing second. Air bubbles formed on top of it as if something were boiling. Then, out of nowhere, a human foot appeared and began to materialize. An old-looking man emerged, wearing a servant's suit and clearly resembling a butler. However, the leader immediately assumed that he was the Demon King, a title granted only to the boss of an S-class dungeon, the wildest and most dangerous villain. Even the butler himself seemed shocked that someone like him was being mistaken for the Demon King. Saki did not waste any time. She immediately readied her sword and lunged toward the man. At the same time, the leader activated his eye power, using a skill called Ice Javelin, which launched multiple ice shards toward the butler at insane speeds. Saki also used Lumina Slash to enhance the power of the ice shards, multiplying them countless times. The entire area was covered in ice, yet the butler remained unharmed due to his power. The butler calmly remarked that young people these days lacked proper manners, attacking without even pausing to listen, and that on top of everything else, they were completely ignorant. Then we see 4 more figures standing beside the butler, all smiling as they look at the humans. One of them, a blonde elf, uses magic to throw the leader off balance while smiling sadistically, realizing that extra people had come along through the teleportation circle. In no time at all, these associates of the Demon King defeat the adventurers with ease, despite them being high-ranked. One of them tells the others that this is not the time to play around, because the Lord Demon King is finally arriving. Another massive teleportation circle appears in the boss room. Someone with long, wavy hair and royal attire begins to emerge, shocking the entire guild and all the teammates, including Yuki, who is unable to move due to the overwhelming surge of power. The Demon King fully materializes and immediately locks eyes with Yuki. Everyone present bows before the monster. As the Demon King smiles, all of them hail him. The guild leader realizes that at this rate, they will be completely wiped out. He wonders if anyone in the team can create an opening so they can do something. But the devilish aura is so intense that no one can move. Yuki understands that total annihilation is imminent, but there is one thing he is determined to do. He will not let the same tragedy repeat itself. He quickly pulls out his bag and starts rummaging through it, knowing that if the tragedy is to be prevented and the adventurers are to be saved, then he knows exactly what he must do. He pulls out a device with a button and presses it. A yellow glow begins materializing on the ground. It is a return sequence initiated by Yuki himself with a countdown of 5 seconds. As soon as the button is pressed, a barrier forms, protecting everyone from the guild. However, Yuki steps outside the barrier, sword in hand. He immediately taunts the Demon King, and when the Demon King appears in front of him, Yuki declares that he will be his opponent. Even the Demon King is surprised, wondering what a mere human could possibly do. Meanwhile, those who had ridiculed Yuki still fail to grasp the situation, realizing too late that if Yuki steps out of the return circle's range, they will be unable to return because the remote will be out of range. Saki screams Yuki's name, panicking over the reckless decision he is making. Just then, the leader intervenes, stopping Saki from rushing toward Yuki, knowing how dangerous the situation is. He immediately dashes toward the return circle, leaving Yuki behind to face the danger alone. Yuki turns around and smiles at the leader, knowing that he has understood the plan. Saki wonders what Conan is doing, while Yuki nervously continues smiling, believing that the leader made the right choice and truly understood what he intended. Suddenly, one of the Demon King's subordinates rushes forward and punches Yuki straight in the stomach, causing him to cough up blood. The Demon King watches closely, wondering what Yuki is planning. With only 2 seconds left before the return sequence activates, blood drips from Yuki's mouth as he smiles and tells the Demon King that he will defeat him. The return sequence completes. Yuki throws the remote device away so that it falls back within range, allowing the others to escape. Everyone saw the sacrifice the boy was about to make. Conan immediately caught the button, telling the boy that he had made a magnificent decision by doing so. Finally, the return sequence activated and everyone began teleporting away. Saki cried out for Yuki, unable to stop herself as she disappeared into thin air. The boy could do nothing except smile. Watching everything unfold, the Demon King was surprised. He wondered if this was the boy's way of defeating him. Yuki continued smiling, knowing that what he did was correct. The humans he saved were all high-ranking adventurers, unlike him, and if they made it back alive, they would definitely conquer the dungeon someday. Even though he felt pain at leaving Saki behind, he knew this was something he had to do for the sake of humanity. The Demon King found it laughable that Yuki was willing to throw away his life for humanity's future. He told Yuki that this madness was truly spectacular. However, to everyone's surprise, the Demon King proposed a deal instead. Even Yuki was shocked. Wondering what the Demon King meant, Yuki listened as the Demon King told him to join them and help conquer other dungeon monsters. Clearing dungeons was a completely new concept to Yuki, and he wondered why the Demon King would want to do that. The Demon King explained that monsters were constantly at risk of being wiped out due to human conquest. Humans believed that danger came from demons and monsters, but the Demon King claimed that this was not true. If humans had not entered the dungeons in the first place, monsters would never have gone out of their way to harm them. In fact, monster casualties were increasing day by day, just like the dragon the adventurers had defeated earlier. Yuki found himself agreeing. Monsters targeted by humans were always high-powered ones. If a dungeon was estimated to be S-rank, it was deemed dangerous from the investigation stage. Humans never considered how monsters felt. Their priority was always gaining resources and money. To counter this, the Demon King revealed his plan. They needed to strengthen the dungeon as a whole. To do that, they would conquer other dungeon bosses and obtain their massive magical power. The Demon King could no longer allow the tragedy of his subordinates to repeat. Hearing this, even the Demon King's subordinates looked saddened. Yuki wondered what kind of tragedy the Demon King had endured. He realized that the being standing before him was the same as himself, someone willing to sacrifice others to protect his own, without hesitation. The Demon King was so confident in his plan that he was willing to cooperate with humans if necessary, all for the sake of his subordinates. Yuki understood this feeling deeply. He, too, would do anything for family, even if it meant dying. Yuki asked what the Demon King planned to do after becoming stronger. He demanded that the Demon King swear not to kill humans, but only drive them away. The Demon King explained that since monsters could not leave the dungeon, if they became powerful enough that humans could not defeat them, humans would simply stop coming. Yuki was torn. He wondered if he could truly trust demons, but he had no choice. The Demon King told him that if he refused to trust them, he would perish, taking countless humans with him. The monsters would never stop defending themselves. Yuki knew that someday Conan and the others might return to defeat the Demon King. But if the Demon King was left unchecked until then, casualties would continue. Another dungeon break could occur, possibly repeating the orphanage tragedy all over again. Yuki felt helpless, but he knew he had to act. In the end, he made his decision. He shook hands with the Demon King. Even though Yuki still wanted to defeat him someday, he made it clear that he was not doing this for the demon's sake, but for humanity's. The Demon King smiled, pleased that the boy had finally chosen, and declared that from that day onward, Yuki was their collaborator. Still, a doubt surfaced in Yuki's mind. He wondered if someone like him was truly suited for this role. After all, he didn't even have a class. The Demon King told him that this was precisely why he was important. The Monster Tamer class could only be obtained by someone who had never possessed a class before. As Yuki turned around, he saw multiple monsters staring at him with clear discontent, thinking they could use incompetent trash like him. Yuki smiled. He knew he could not allow these monsters to act however they pleased, because he would be the one to tame them without fail. On the other hand, the Demon King believed that he would make excellent use of how incompetent and foolish Yuki truly was. As the scene shifts, the Demon King explains that for them to enter dungeons, they must be summoned. Therefore, they require a collaborator who is a monster tamer, and that role must be fulfilled by a human. The first condition for becoming a monster tamer is that the job field must be completely blank. The second condition is forming a contract with a monster. He explains that there are 3 ways to form such a contract: fight and defeat the monster, understand and communicate with it, or use force. The others around them appear sleepy as the Demon King explains the second option to Yuki, grabbing his hand. He then states that the third method is to do it by force. Immediately after, the Demon King activates his power, sending a surge of energy into Yuki. The pain causes Yuki to suffer for several seconds, and he immediately pulls his hand away, demanding to know what the Demon King is doing because it hurts. Once the process is complete, Yuki realizes that he can see the Demon King's vision. The Demon King confirms that he can also see Yuki's vision clearly, perhaps too clearly. For Yuki, this becomes a serious problem. His actions are now completely exposed to the Demon King, and he realizes that they are likely already considering the possibility that he might betray them. He understands that he can no longer ask for help, as everything he does will be monitored. He will have to bear the burden alone. Yuki steels himself to carry this responsibility by himself. The Demon King snaps his fingers and tells Yuki that the preparations for the conquest are complete. A transfer circle appears once again, and Yuki is sent back to the surface. A red aura surrounds him as he dematerializes, leaving him confused about what preparations were even made, since he had not done anything yet. Before Yuki fully disappears, the Demon King tells him that any location will do, as long as Yuki can find a dungeon and summon him at the appropriate time so that he can handle everything. Yuki asks when the appropriate time will be, but before the Demon King can answer, Yuki is teleported outside the dungeon. There he sees Saki crying. She freezes in shock when she realizes that Yuki is alive. She immediately hugs him tightly, crying even harder than before. The other adventurers stare in disbelief, wondering how Yuki survived. As the scene shifts to the next day, Yuki is seen inside the dungeon management office, requesting to go on a dungeon conquest by himself. The receptionist is shocked by his request. Yuki himself did not expect to face a hurdle before even entering a dungeon. The receptionist looks at him suspiciously, questioning whether he understands that solo dungeon entry is explicitly restricted. She explains that dungeon raids and conquests are no longer primarily about clearing dungeons, but have become profit-driven activities for adventurers seeking money. Dungeon clearing has been forgotten by most adventurers, everyone except high-ranking individuals who understand the danger. This is precisely why dungeon outbreaks continue to increase. Even though guilds rarely speak about this harsh truth, everyone is already aware of it. To prevent stagnation and reckless dungeon activity, strict security measures and entry restrictions have been placed on discovered dungeons. Only individuals with specific ranks are permitted entry. The receptionist explains that contribution to an adventurer's guild is the main factor in gaining trust. Since Yuki's rank is extremely low, they cannot confirm his contribution, and therefore cannot allow him to suddenly dive into a dungeon alone. Yuki understands this. If he were truly trying to clear a dungeon, entering at such a low level would be pointless, as the monsters are powerful. Most people who do this are desperate for money, dreaming of a lucky breakthrough. However, Yuki needs to enter a dungeon somehow. He immediately changes the topic and explains that he is looking for an F-rank dungeon and that he is not entering for money but for leveling and experience. Hearing this, the receptionist relaxes and smiles. She tells him that in that case, he should go to an F-rank dungeon called Labyrinth of Silence, which has reports of monsters suitable for rookies. If this dungeon is acceptable to Yuki, she says, she will guide him to its location. As the scene shifts, we arrive near a forest area where the Labyrinth of Silence is located. The escort opens the lock and lets the boy enter, wishing him good luck for his conquest. She hands him a red button and tells him to press it if he requires any assistance. Yuki is shocked. Even though the lady told him that there was strict security everywhere for a neglected dungeon with only a few monsters, he guesses that this level of security is about right. Suddenly, a vicious voice rings inside Yuki's head. The Demon King asks what a neglected dungeon actually is. Yuki is startled, wondering if this is one of the Demon King's skills that allows him to speak directly into his head. However, the Demon King explains that it is actually Yuki's skill instead, since communicating with monsters is a basic ability of a monster tamer. Yuki snaps back mentally, saying that this is his first time using a skill, so how would he know about it if no one told him? He wonders if this is one of those passive or automatic skills he had heard rumors about. Even though it is convenient, it still feels strange to him. Yuki then explains in his mind that a neglected dungeon refers to one that lacks management, maintenance, and conquest. As the number of dungeons increases, the response teams can no longer keep up. The situation would be different if the dungeon were rich in resources, because then adventurers would flock there for money and proper measures would be taken. Since none of that applies here, the dungeon has been left alone. The Demon King understands. In other words, a neglected dungeon is one that humans have abandoned. The Demon King then realizes that monsters must be breeding quite peacefully inside. Eventually, when the dungeon can no longer withstand the monster reproduction, it collapses. Even though this explanation makes sense, Yuki wonders why there are so few monsters in this dungeon. As he continues walking around, he fails to encounter even a single one, making the entire conquest feel extremely boring. Still, Yuki does not feel right about it. Even if this is a weak dungeon, the situation is far from normal. As if responding to his thoughts, the entire place suddenly starts shaking. A green-colored aura spreads throughout the dungeon. Instinctively, Yuki knows that he needs to run without thinking. From the gaps in the labyrinth, a green liquid begins flowing out, gradually materializing into a strange form. Other people who had entered the dungeon panic as well, wondering why the dungeon boss appeared in such a low-class dungeon without any warning. As the others run away, Yuki runs toward the boss instead. He realizes that the dungeon boss is a massive slime. The Demon King analyzes the situation and explains that because the supply of humans in this dungeon is low, the monsters resorted to cannibalism. That is why there are no monsters left, and only the boss remains. This is also the reason why a boss that should have been harmless in a low-level dungeon has grown to such an enormous size. As everyone runs, Yuki tries to help, shouting directions to a path that should be safe. However, the slime catches up to one of the women and captures her, pulling her inside its body. She panics, wondering what to do. Yuki stops. He knows she has to be saved. He considers the monsters at his disposal and realizes that the Demon King's name is Liber. He wonders if summoning Liber could save the woman. However, the Demon King immediately tells him that it is impossible, because the aftershock of Libra's summoning alone would blow the slime apart along with everything else. Yuki knows this is bad. The woman is slowly losing consciousness. But then he comes up with a plan. Without wasting any more time, he acts. Yuki jumps straight into the slime, willingly entering its body. Seeing this, the Demon King is shocked. As expected, even if his own body is damaged, Yuki is the type to save what must be saved without hesitation, even if it means sacrificing his own sanity. Once the woman is within the protective range of the barrier, Yuki immediately summons the Demon King, believing that now is the appropriate time. A teleportation circle appears, and the Demon King Liber manifests behind Yuki, laughing. He tells Yuki that for the time being, the demon will allow the human to use him as he pleases, calling Yuki his master. However, the moment the summoning stabilizes, our boy's condition worsens rapidly. His body feels as if it is being burned from the inside out, every vein screaming in agony. Even so, the Demon King has no intention of letting Yuki break at this moment. If this is truly all the power the boy can handle at full output, then it would only ever be enough for an enemy of this level, and nothing more. That kind of power would not suffice in the long run. Soon after, both the boy and the Demon King act together. Their power synchronizes, forming a dense purple sphere of energy between them. The attack takes shape and is given a name, Chaotic Dawn. Despite its small size, the attack is more than enough. The slime is completely erased, blown into nothingness, not even leaving a trace behind as if it never existed at all. Yuki realizes then that this was not simply an attack, but a complete calamity. The sheer force of it frightens even the girl he had just saved, along with the other boy nearby. But before there is any time to react, the boy notices something far more serious. Yuki is badly injured. Blood covers his face, his body completely drained. They need to get him out of the labyrinth immediately. As Yuki looks up at him, his vision blurs. His legs give out, and he realizes he can no longer stand on his own. With no strength left in his body, RMC collapses to the ground and loses consciousness. A few days later, the scene shifts to the endless abyssal dungeon, inside a vast red hall. Yuki stares at his new E-rank license in disbelief, realizing that he somehow leveled up while unconscious in the hospital. It feels unreal. He remembers how terrified everyone had been, yet those two adventurers still carried him out of the dungeon and handled everything afterward. It leaves him wondering who was truly being saved in that moment. Suddenly, Liber appears beside him holding a glass of wine, asking why Yuki looks so worn out and suggesting they have a toast. But our MC glares at the Demon King instead, questioning why Liber is celebrating when Yuki was only able to summon him for a single second. He quickly corrects himself, realizing that all he truly did was call out to him. Liber explains that in that moment the boy did not abandon the life right in front of him. He did not hesitate. Instead, he saw another option and chose it. That resolve is what impressed him. With that, Liber offers the glass of wine again, stating that he likes that kind of strength. Yuki accepts the drink, saying he will take the compliment coming from such a powerful demon king. Still, Liber warns him that constantly standing on the brink of death is dangerous. If Yuki continues summoning him like that, it will only lead to his end. He advises the boy that next time, he should summon someone else instead. At that moment, an undead maid appears before them. She introduces herself as Elvina, dressed in a classic maid outfit, politely stating that she is pleased to meet her new master. Yuki greets her back, thinking that she seems calm and kind. Suddenly, Elvina strikes a playful pose and remarks that it would be troublesome if he were to fall for her at first sight, explaining cheerfully that since she is undead, she does not even have a pulse. Yuki becomes slightly embarrassed by the strange joke while Liber silently watches the interaction. When Yuki asks if she will be all right, the Demon King assures him that she is stronger than he is. Elvina gives a confident thumbs up and says she aims to be a servant who is easy to talk to. Liber then tells Yuki that his first priority is to level up until his body can withstand the power of his summons. The road ahead will not be easy, but he must grow much stronger to survive what is coming. To demonstrate her strength, Elvina charges forward and annihilates the fire monsters with a single devastating punch, declaring the threat eliminated. Our MC can only stare in shock at her overwhelming power. They are currently training inside an E-rank dungeon known as the Den of the Burning Ones. The maid begins moving at incredible speed, her afterimages appearing everywhere as she proudly boasts about how capable she is. Our MC smiles faintly, reminded of his time at the orphanage when a certain kid used to show off in the exact same way. A memory surfaces of a small girl proudly asking Yuki what he thought of her skills. A wave of nostalgia washes over him until something strange happens. The level-up notifications refuse to stop appearing. Alarmed, he shouts, asking whether something can be done about it. Elvina tilts her head in confusion, wondering if complaining about leveling up is some kind of joke only living people make. She genuinely cannot understand how someone could be annoyed by getting stronger. As they continue walking, Yuki explains that unlike Liber, he can summon Elvina for long periods without any strain. Upon hearing this, Elvina reveals that Liber is actually too special to be summoned properly. The mana required to summon the Demon King is so immense that the connection was severed halfway through the process. Only then does Yuki fully understand the truth. During that battle, he did not summon the Demon King himself. He only managed to bring forth the tip of the Demon King's finger. The maid calmly offers herself as a proper bargain, someone who can be summoned safely with her master's current mana reserves. Hearing this, Yuki smiles and tells the undead servant that he is counting on her help for the journey ahead. The simple trust in his words makes Elvina unexpectedly shy, and she hides slightly behind the contract sigil that represents her summoning. At that moment, Yuki realizes something important. Summoning is not merely about raw power. It is about efficiency, cost-effectiveness, and how well one can manage their limited mana. Soon after, the two arrive before the boss room. A massive door towers over them, thick and heavy, clearly designed to keep whatever lies inside sealed away. Yuki wonders how they are supposed to open something like that. In response to his hesitation, Elvina snaps her fingers as if surprised he even had to ask. Without wasting another second, she rushes forward to demonstrate the proper way to deal with such obstacles. She kicks the massive door down in one clean motion and casually remarks that one should always knock before entering. Inside the chamber, a knight clad in heavy armor slowly rises to its feet. A blazing helmet burns atop its head, and a sword wreathed in intense flames rests in its grasp. Elvina briefly apologizes for the intrusion, then immediately rushes forward, declaring that this monster will serve as their training sacrifice. The knight does not hesitate. It swings its flaming blade toward the undead maid with lethal force. Yuki reacts instantly, drawing his sword and shouting for them to wait before the battle escalates. Something about the flames catches his attention. They are different from the fire monsters they have faced so far. As he rushes forward, calling out Elvena's name, she effortlessly parries the knight's attack, even before her master can reach her side. The clash of metal rings loudly through the chamber. Elvena seems only mildly surprised by the power behind the strike. When Yuki asks if she is all right, she praises him instead, saying that such awareness is exactly what she would expect from a good master. She then asks when he noticed that the flames were sacred rather than ordinary fire. Yuki replies that it was instinctive. The flames simply looked different. They reminded him of the light sake used in battle, which carried a holy attribute. Elvena explains that such flames are the natural enemy of undead beings like herself. She even jokes that her heart is racing, despite the fact that it stopped beating long ago. The knight, unfazed by their exchange, activates a skill. A sanctuary of fire manifests, forming a burning circle around them and sealing off all escape routes. Elvena immediately realizes that the boss has no intention of letting them retreat and compares its oppressive presence to that of the demon King Liber. Yuki briefly considers summoning Liber again to escape the situation, but Elvena stops him. With his current strength, she explains, she is the only summon he can sustain. While she remains manifested, he would not even be able to summon the tip of the Demon King's finger. With no other choice, Yuki accepts the situation and decides that they will have to deal with this enemy themselves. Elvena finds his resolve somewhat cruel and teasingly asks whether the monster tamer truly intends to fight alongside his monster. Yuki smiles and confirms that they are no longer master and summon, but battle partners. Elvena returns the smile, agreeing with his declaration. She shifts into a proper combat stance and says they should stay together. Yuki grips his sword firmly and prepares himself as well, determined to show the results of all his recent level-ups. And deep in his mind, he acknowledges that if things truly spiral out of control, he may be forced to use his trump card. The young man suddenly remembers that he must have acquired a new skill when he leveled up earlier. Acting on instinct, he activates it at once. The moment he does, his eye glows intensely, shining with a golden light. The skill reveals itself as Eye of Truth, and information floods his vision. The dungeon boss is using Holy Fire, an attribute that is especially strong against darkness. Realizing this, he immediately understands the danger Elvena is in. When the servant asks what is wrong, he notices her dark attribute and urgently tells her to attack while warning her of the incoming counter. The knight reacts instantly, unleashing a powerful sacred flame. A sharp danger warning flashes through Yuki's vision, and he shouts for her to dodge. Thanks to the warning, the two barely manage to evade the holy fire attack. He rushes in and pulls his servant away from the danger, making sure she is not hurt. He then explains that he can now see a monster's attributes, skills, and even their danger level. His glowing golden eye burns brighter as the newly awakened power continues to activate. Elvena thanks him, remarking that this is one of the basic abilities of a true monster tamer. The Fire Knight charges again, and although Yuki warns that his skill does not reveal everything, Elvena replies that this advantage is more than enough. With renewed confidence, she rushes toward the dungeon boss once more. Guided by her master's commands, she attacks freely, no longer worrying about surprise counterstrikes. Her blow lands cleanly, yet the knight shows no sign of damage. Yuki freezes in shock as he realizes her attack had no effect at all. It quickly becomes clear that her strikes are not truly reaching the enemy. Using Eye of Truth again, he finally understands the problem. The knight is not what it appears to be. Inside the armor, a small fire monster is moving freely, avoiding the servant's attacks from within. When Yuki explains this, Elvena finally understands what he means. With the plan forming, the servant asks her master not to hesitate and to trust her completely just this once. The Fire Knight prepares another devastating attack. Yuki shouts precise commands without hesitation, telling her to jump right, duck, retreat, and watch for an attack from below. His glowing eye tracks every movement as he orders her to strike the knight's right shoulder. Following the flow, Elvena then aims higher and delivers a powerful kick straight to the helmet. The impact lands solidly, and for the first time, the armored knight stumbles backward. Elvena notes with surprise that this is the first time the enemy has truly reacted to her attacks. Yuki continues pushing Eye of Truth to its limit, realizing they are only one step away from victory. Before he can issue the next command, A sudden explosion erupts. Elvina throws herself between the blast and her master, saving him at the last moment. She scolds him for neglecting his own safety, and Yuki apologizes awkwardly, aware that he took a dangerous risk. At that moment, Elvina grows serious and tells him to activate her special skill. Confused, he asks what kind of ability she possesses. A blue screen appears before him, revealing the skill made of all wild, a technique that temporarily boosts all of her stats. She explains that as her tamer, he has the authority to forcibly activate his summoned skills. This one, however, can only be used once and lasts for an instant. If timed correctly, it will prevent the fire monster from dodging. Trusting him completely, she smiles and says she knows he will use it at the perfect moment. Understanding the plan, Yuki steels himself and decides that the next exchange will end the fight. His eye floods with danger alerts as the knight prepares its final assault. He orders Elvina to dodge right and continue attacking non-stop, then suddenly commands her to stop to deceive the enemy. The servant slides left exactly as instructed. The fire knight unleashes a massive attack, and the explosion clips Yuki, throwing him hard to the ground. Elvina looks back in alarm as he spits blood, the damage far more severe than before. Even so, he forces himself back to his feet and shouts for her not to worry. His summoning mark glows brightly as he gives the final command. At that instant, he activates Maid of All Wild. Pink energy envelops Elvina, her power surging explosively. With her enhanced strength, she strikes directly at the true core of the enemy, the small fire monster within the armor. The kick lands with terrifying force, creating a massive crater and shattering the knight's armor completely. Stripped of its protection, the dungeon boss collapses helplessly to the ground. With its true form exposed and destroyed, the Fire Knight is finally defeated. Completely exhausted, Yuki finally collapses to the ground, but despite his condition, he celebrates weakly, relieved that they managed to win in the end. Elvina warns him that activating that skill consumes an enormous amount of energy, and because of that, she tells him that she needs to say goodbye for now. With those words, the undead servant bids her master farewell and disappears in a bright flash of pink light. Lying helplessly on the ground, Yuki calls out to her, asking her to wait because he cannot even stand up. He looks down at his hand and tries to summon her again, only to realize that it is completely unresponsive. There is no reaction at all. Suddenly, his surroundings change, and Yuki finds himself back in Liber's dungeon. The Demon King greets him calmly, saying that he is glad the boy managed to return safely. Still shaken, Yuki immediately asks where Elvina is, saying that he needs to speak with her for abandoning him like that. Without answering directly, Liber guides him to another location. The place looks like a sacred garden, almost like a beautiful shrine. The Demon King comments that it is a good thing Yuki returned when he did, because otherwise he would not even have been able to see her one last time. Yuki freezes when he sees Elvina lying motionless on a bed of flowers. Shock overwhelms him as he asks what this place is. Liber explains that this is how they mourn those who have passed and asks whether it is really so different from how humans do it. The realization hits Yuki like a hammer. He asks why Elvina is gone and what happened to her to end up like this. Liber calmly explains that Elvina is an undead maid and that her race's skills come with a severe side effect. The meaning becomes painfully clear. The usage limit of her skill required the sacrifice of her own life. Devastated, Yuki lowers his head, realizing that she paid with her life so they could win. Rage and despair flood his chest as he screams that he never ordered that and that all he wanted was to defeat the dungeon's enemy. With a sharp glare, Liber tells him to stop talking, explaining that Elvina made that choice to protect her dungeon. He says that her sacrifice was not meaningless and that she fulfilled her role perfectly. But Yuki refuses to accept it. He clenches his fists and says that the responsibility lies with him and no one else. He slams his fist into the ground with all his strength, feeling the crushing weight of guilt press down on his shoulders. He thinks that he should have thought things through better instead of blindly following her suggestion. Memories from the past resurface, reminding him of how he was unable to fight until the very end back then as well. Tears well up in his eyes as he blames himself once more for being too weak to protect her. Liber watches him silently before finally speaking, saying that he will make Yuki strong enough until the day he can properly summon him. Hearing that, Yuki looks up and asks desperately if there is no tamer skill capable of reviving Elvina. The Demon King answers coldly that there is no such thing. Tamers consume monsters, they do not fix them. Completely crushed, Yuki feels all hope slipping away. That is when another maid suddenly appears, casually remarking that being so cruel is not good for anyone. Liber calls her May, and she adds with a smile that everyone should have already reached a conclusion about this matter. Then she tilts her head and points out that Yuki was not part of that discussion, so it was not truly everyone. Something feels off. Yuki activates his demonic eye of truth, and his eye glows intensely as he analyzes the newly arrived maid. The skill reveals her true nature, sacred magic, and more importantly, a resurrection skill bound by specific conditions. Shock washes over Yuki as he finally understands. With a mischievous smile, May asks whether he wants to know the method to revive Elvina. Yuki is filled with hope and shouts, asking if Elvina can really come back to life. He points at the maid and says that with her skill, his friend can be saved from that fate. May simply winks and replies that since he can already see her skill, there is no need for her to explain how it works. However, Yuki shakes his head and explains that he can only see the effect of the skill, not its requirements. He adds that there are clearly conditions attached to its use. Faced with this, Liber understands the limitation and tells the maid to explain everything properly to Yuki. With a calm expression, the servant formally introduces herself as Mai, the head maid of the dungeon. She explains that she is responsible for managing everything within it, maintenance, backups, and even resurrection protocols. The words backup and resurrection make Yuki's eyes shine with renewed hope. Mai recalls that humans frequently invade dungeons to eliminate them. She projects an image of a defeated dragon and explains that her role exists for worst-case scenarios. If a core defender dies, she can revive them so the dungeon does not collapse entirely. Unable to contain himself, Yuki shouts that they can revive Elvina right now. Mai immediately corrects him, reminding him that the skill has strict conditions. She begins by explaining the first condition. The mana cost is enormous. As an example, Mai says that reviving Yuki if he were to die would require mana equivalent to creating an entire dungeon floor. Hearing that, Yuki realizes that for a human, resurrection costs the mana of a full S-rank dungeon floor, and his heart tightens as he thinks about Elvina. Mai continues, explaining that resurrecting Elvina would drastically shrink the dungeon itself to compensate for the mana loss. Yuki immediately understands the implication. If the dungeon becomes smaller, it also becomes easier to conquer. The maid confirms this and explains that someone named Cyan-chan strongly opposed using resurrection for that very reason. Thinking quickly, Yuki suggests slowly storing excess mana over time. Unfortunately, Mai shakes her head and crushes his hope, explaining that Elvina's remaining mana will dissipate completely within 10 days. That means they must gather the required mana before then. After a brief pause, Mai reveals her original idea, having Yuki conquer another dungeon. She smiles lightly and clarifies that it would need to be far larger than any dungeon he has faced so far. At once, Yuki understands. Clearing dungeons is not just about leveling up, it is about stealing their accumulated mana for the resurrection. Liber confirms this, but adds that the dungeons they have dealt with so far are nowhere near sufficient. Yuki asks how much mana would be required if even weak dungeons are not enough. Mai replies honestly that she does not understand human ranking systems well. She recalls that, when she suggested conquering a massive dungeon, everyone strongly opposed the idea, believing it would lead only to pointless death. Liber speaks up, stating that they cannot expose the key piece of the plan, Yuki, who already risked his life once, to such overwhelming danger again. Clenching his fists, Yuki steps forward and asks Liber to let him take the mission alone. The Demon King immediately calls him reckless and asks whether he even has a strategy. Liber warns that sending Yuki and another summoned creature without preparation would only lead to another tragedy like Elvina's. Yuki admits that Liber is right. He has no concrete plan and he does not yet know how to grow strong enough. Still, he declares that if this is the only path to saving her, then he will walk it no matter the cost. He reminds Liber that before any other contract, he formed a pact with him first. Liber nods slowly, acknowledging the words, though hesitation still lingers in his expression. Suddenly, drops of blood fall from Liber's hand onto the grass of the sacred garden. The blood pools together and takes shape, forming a man dressed in a butler's suit. With a calm voice, the figure declares that in that case, he will resolve the problem himself, and that he will personally train Yuki. Yuki immediately recognizes the butler. This was the same man who once fought Saki. Mei calls him Vento-chan, reminding Yuki that he was also one of those who supported the dungeon-conquering plan. Still, Vento warns that at Yuki's current level, sacrifices are inevitable. Faced with everyone's resolve, Liber finally agrees. He entrusts Yuki to Vento for the next 7 days, and the butler accepts the order without hesitation. Turning around, Vento tells Yuki to follow him to the training grounds. Yuki quickly follows, saying that he is counting on him to become stronger. Mai lets out a small sigh of relief, believing that Vento's strength will be enough. However, Liber immediately orders her to accompany them and supervise the training personally. He explains that Vento opposed involving a human until the very last moment, and he fears the butler might go too far and kill Yuki during training. Mai blinks in surprise at the sudden command, but nods without protest. Moments later, a massive blue teleportation magic circle envelops them. Yuki feels tense, unsure of what awaits him. When the light fades, he stares around in amazement and asks if this place is truly inside a dungeon. Vento replies calmly that this is merely a fragment of Liber's power, explaining that each executive was granted an entire floor of their own. Vento says that Yuki is the first human ever allowed to see the executive's floors, and that it should be considered a great honor. Hearing this, Yuki realizes that resurrection truly must be a last resort if it requires sacrificing so many dungeon floors. He then asks what the training will involve and whether the butler plans to help him level up. Vento calmly explains that leveling up is the process of extracting mana from monsters and fusing it into one's own body. Yuki immediately understands that adventurers damage entire dungeons simply by fighting inside them. However, Vento adds that because Yuki has a contract with Liber, he cannot level up through conventional means. With that explanation, Yuki finally understands why he was sent to other dungeons instead. He asks what his actual training will consist of. Without warning, the butler suddenly throws a sword straight at him. Yuki barely manages to catch it, completely caught off guard. He looks down at the weapon and briefly wonders if the training will simply involve improving his equipment. Vento immediately dismisses that thought, stating that Yuki has no foundation whatsoever, and that there is far more he needs to learn. He continues, explaining that to achieve anything, one must possess strength, knowledge, and talent. Before Yuki can respond, a massive wave of pressure crashes into him. He cries out, asking what that was. With a serious expression, Vento tells him that if he truly wants Elvina back, then he must first build the strength he lacks. The butler raises his sword and declares that Yuki must rebuild himself from nothing. Yuki barely manages to block the next attack. Vento's movements are so fast that he cannot even think properly. As their blades clash, the butler continues his lecture, stating that if Yuki cannot even endure this much, then fate itself cannot be entrusted to him. Staggered by the overwhelming pressure, Yuki shouts back that he does not intend to use his power to harm anyone. Vento replies coldly that he alone will decide whether those words are true. He adds that this training exists for the sake of the dungeon, and for the great demon king, Liber. At that moment, Yuki realizes something terrifying. Vento does not care if he dies during this training. The butler charges forward once more and tells Yuki that he has only one task: survive for 3 hours. He states that battle is the fastest and most honest way to learn. With that, their swords collide with explosive force, marking the beginning of the brutal training. With a fierce and determined look in his eyes, Yuki shouts that he will fight with the resolve to sacrifice himself if necessary. From there, Yuki activates his special skill, Magic Eye of Truth, for the battle. The moment his eye glows, the technique reveals Vento's attribute as water along with his skill, Blue Flower Blade. The realization hits immediately. Any direct hit would be fatal. The difference in level and experience is simply too vast. Understanding this, Yuki decides that if defending is impossible, then survival lies in movement, staying where danger cannot reach him. Vento questions whether this single ability is all the young man can rely on. As he attacks again, the butler effortlessly kicks Yuki away, criticizing his delayed judgment. He warns that thinking only after being blocked is no different from asking to be eliminated, and that hesitation in battle is the same as surrender. Vento attacks again, and Yuki's eye floods his vision with danger warnings. Panic grips him as the speed of the strike nearly overwhelms his senses, and he barely manages to react in time to defend himself. Realizing defense alone will not save him, Yuki shifts tactics and goes on the offensive, his sword glowing as he lunges forward. The butler blocks the strike effortlessly and states that forcing an attack will never change the outcome. In the next instant, Vento flashes forward with absurd speed, sending Yuki flying through the air. The butler pauses, studying him with a serious and disappointed expression. Even so, he acknowledges that Yuki's movements have improved slightly since the fight began. Breathing heavily, Yuki shouts that with his eye, he can see the sword's trajectory and understand how to defend against it. It is not just about stats. His eye allows him to perfectly read how monsters move. At that moment, a torn piece of Vento's clothing falls to the ground. The butler realizes then that Yuki isn't merely observing, he is learning. Still, Vento warns that even with such a skill, it is far from enough. He explains that their physiques are fundamentally different, and as a result, their sword techniques and force output are on entirely separate levels. The truth hits Yuki hard. Vento has been holding back the entire time. As their blades clash again, the butler adds that their battle experience cannot even be compared. Yuki's arms and legs scream in protest, nearing their limits as danger alerts continue to pile up in his vision. With his eye glowing fiercely, Yuki notices something terrifying. Vento has not used magic at all. This realization confirms it. The butler exists on a completely different plane. Even so, Yuki does not retreat. He charges forward once more, shouting that if that is the case, then he will catch up to him one day. Vento wonders whether this unbreakable spirit is mere recklessness, or something far more dangerous. Deciding to find out, the butler prepares a new attack and declares that he will test Yuki seriously this time. Suddenly, Vento activates his skill. Blood-dark energy erupts around him, completely enveloping his form. Yuki's magic eye is overwhelmed, flooded with countless danger alerts until he can no longer see anything meaningful at all. In that instant, Yuki understands something crucial. He does not need more warnings, he needs information. Forcing himself to stay calm, he changes his perspective. Instead of reacting to danger, he focuses on prediction. He pours everything into his eye, ignoring the alerts entirely, and forces it to extract the core data. The truth is revealed. The skill converts blood into bladed constructs that attack the target directly. The butler launches the attack, blood petal blade, with lethal intent. With his eye blazing, Yuki braces himself. The technique detonates upon impact, engulfing the area in smoke and debris. The explosion leaves the battlefield silent. Vento watches for a moment before approaching Yuki's motionless body, his expression unreadable. Then, Yuki jolts awake, gasping, lying in a luxurious bed. Confused, he looks around. Sitting calmly in an armchair nearby, Vento asks whether he has finally awakened from his forced rest. Rising with a book in hand, the butler tells him to follow. The next phase of training awaits. The memory of being struck still lingers vividly in Yuki's mind, and he asks about his injuries. Vento explains that I intervened and healed him before death could fully take hold. He adds that despite being crude, Yuki attempted to copy the technique using his eye at the very last moment. This earns the butler's genuine interest. Vento admits that Yuki's audacity, attempting to steal a skill mid-combat, has impressed him, and that he is now curious to see just how far the young man can go. But he issues a warning. From this point onward, the real training begins. Moments later, Vento opens a massive door, revealing the next stage. Inside, numerous monsters wait, their presence suffocating. The butler declares that to begin, Yuki will face all of them alone. Color drains from Yuki's face, sweat forming instantly. Acknowledging the absurdity of the numbers, Vento tells him to deal with it regardless and prove his worth. Letting out a nervous laugh, Yuki thinks that he never imagined he would grow accustomed to situations like this. Then, with a firm and determined look, he accepts the truth. He has already grown used to facing a death he knows may come. The scene shifts, and Yuki finds himself dressed in a butler's uniform, staring down at his own clothes in disbelief, and wondering why he is doing something like this. His confusion only deepens when he realizes he is serving tea to monsters, one of them a bat-like creature hovering lazily nearby. Vento explains that an elite swordsman wastes no movement and optimizes everything he does. According to him, a butler's discipline allows no distractions. By serving, walking, bowing, and reacting with precision, Yuki must learn to use his entire body in harmony while simultaneously refining the use of his eye. Skills, Vento reminds him, grow according to how they are used. With that, he explains that several monsters are present at the gathering, and instructs Yuki to read their desires instead of their hostility. Accepting the challenge, Yuki decides to observe first. Vento demonstrates how to serve tea with flawless elegance, every movement deliberate, efficient, and free of excess. His focus never wavers, and when he finishes, he stands perfectly straight, his posture dignified and severe. Inspired, Yuki attempts to imitate him. However, the moment he tries to move with the same rhythm, he loses his balance. A stack of plates crashes to the floor, shattering loudly. As he cleans up the mess, he realizes that observation alone is not enough. Simply copying movements will never work. He must adapt everything to his own body and instincts. By the second day, Yuki appears calmer. One of the monsters stares him down with curiosity before suddenly knocking him over and questioning whether he is the newcomer Vento took an interest in. The creature laughs, claiming that must mean Yuki is strong. Before he can properly respond, a powerful punch slams into his stomach. The impact teaches him something important. What he lacks in stamina, he must compensate for with his magic eye of truth. Fully focused, Yuki enters combat, using his eye to observe both Vento and the monsters, testing himself through real battle. When the exchange ends, he realizes he has learned more than he expected. On the fourth day, Yuki encounters a lizard monster curled up in a corner, visibly uncomfortable. Activating his eye, he discovers the creature is suffering from a chilled status effect. Understanding the situation, Yuki offers it a blanket and something warm to drink. Through this interaction, he realizes that monsters are not uniform, they are as diverse and complex as humans. Serving tea to the creature, Yuki finally begins to grasp the true purpose behind this training. It is not about obedience but awareness, prediction, adaptation. By the sixth day, he meets a small bat monster that appears weak and hungry. Thinking simply, Yuki prepares food, believing that all he needs to do is predict its needs and act accordingly. Instead, the bat suddenly bites him and begins draining his blood. Only then does Yuki realize the creature possesses a vampirism skill, using his blood as nourishment. Painfully, the lesson is etched into him. Prediction without complete understanding is still failure. On the seventh and final day, Yuki serves tea with surprising calmness and mastery. His movements are precise, his posture steady, his presence composed. He places the cup on the table with refined elegance, the result of 7 relentless days of repetition and pain. Vento tastes the tea. While he says the flavor itself is irrelevant, he acknowledges that Yuki's demeanor is acceptable. For 7 days, it has been a cycle of combat and gatherings, bruises and observation, and Yuki has endured it all. But Vento immediately denies that the training is over. He warns that the end begins now. Without hesitation, Vento activates Bloodflower Blade, crimson energy erupting around him. Yuki's heart tightens as he realizes that this is the true final trial. Vento explains that Yuki can now activate his eye instantly, and that he once merely imitated him. Now he must go further. He must make the skill his own. Otherwise, he will perish. Yuki accepts this without fear. He already understands that failure here means death. His eye glows intensely as he analyzes the incoming attack. Vento's red gaze locks onto him, both master and student standing on the edge of a decisive clash. This time, Yuki sees the blood-to-blade transformation in far greater detail than before. Understanding dawns. With resolve, Yuki cuts his own hand, letting blood flow. In that moment, he realizes he finally understands how to use his body as part of the technique. Activating Blue Flower Blade in his own way, he prepares for the final exchange. Their blades collide. unleashing a violent explosion of blood-tinted energy that shakes the area. Through sheer will and perfect timing, Yuki breaks through. His blade lands cleanly across Vento's chest. The impact of the clash sends Vento flying backward, his body crashing against the ground as shock flashes across his face. Lying there, the butler lets out a quiet lament, murmuring that it is a pity, wondering if he misjudged a single step. But Yuki does not share that hesitation. As he stands there, his thoughts drift to Elvina and the fact that he still has not saved her from her fate. That realization fuels something deep inside him. Gritting his teeth, he forces himself upright and refuses to accept an ending decided by someone else. He yells for Vento not to decide his limits on his behalf. Blood stains the ground beneath his feet, and without hesitation, Yuki draws upon it, activating his skill once more with everything he has left. This time he does not imitate, he redefines. The blood rises and twists, transforming into countless razor-sharp blades that hover in the air, responding to his will. It is no longer Bloodflower blade. It is his own version, shaped by desperation, resolve, and refusal to yield. Vento's eyes widen as he realizes the truth. Yuki has not merely copied the skill, he has reshaped it entirely. With a raw shout, Yuki demands to know if his master truly believed he would give up after failing once. Declaring that this is no longer a battle of refinement, but one of quantity, he unleashes the swarm of blades in a final, overwhelming assault. The storm of blood crashes forward, each blade carrying his resolve to surpass his master. The attack lands cleanly. Panting heavily, Yuki asks what Vento thinks of his new technique, his body trembling from exhaustion. But even then, the butler raises his hand and halts the blade barehanded, blood dripping slowly from his palm. Rather than anger, Vento smiles. He praises the technique as splendid. Barely able to remain conscious, Yuki struggles to ask what Vento truly thought of his performance. The butler answers honestly, pointing out that while the attack is powerful, it cannot be used repeatedly in quick succession. Unable to deny it, Yuki admits he has reached his limit. His legs give out. Before he can collapse completely, Vento catches him, preventing his body from striking the ground. As he lifts him, Yuki's phone slips from his pocket, falling unnoticed onto the floor. Carrying him away, the butler remarks that there is still much to teach him in the future that awaits. On the ground, the abandoned phone lights up. A message arrives from Saki. The scene shifts to her as she stares at the screen, worry evident on her face. Even knowing the operation is a joint effort, she cannot shake her concern for Yuki's safety. She opens the attached document. The mission details become clear. It is an exploration request for a B-rank dungeon. Worse still, the dungeon's boss remains unknown. A fact that makes the mission far more dangerous than it should be. Back in Liber's dungeon, Yuki announces that he will conquer a dungeon the following day. The Demon King listens with a faint smile and remarks that it seems Yuki has finally gained some real strength. Yuki confirms it calmly, adding that he can at least handle a sword properly now. Mai, however, tilts her head in doubt and asks how an E-rank like him plans to enter a B-rank dungeon. Yuki explains that it is not a conquest mission but an investigation request, and that he will be participating as support and porter. Mai understands immediately, knowing full well that once Yuki finds an opening, he will move on his own terms. She then asks who he plans to contract with for the mission. Yuki pauses only for a moment, already having the answer ready. When he says the name, Vento freezes, utterly speechless. Even Mai is taken aback, clearly not expecting that choice from the young adventurer. Liber's expression hardens slightly as he asks whether Yuki is truly serious about his decision. Yuki meets his gaze without hesitation. The scene then shifts to the adventurers' guild. From across the hall, Saki waves enthusiastically the moment she spots him. Her face brightens instantly, her smile radiant as she reunites with her childhood friend. She notices the sword at his side and casually asks when he started using one, catching Yuki off guard. He apologizes for the trouble, but she dismisses it easily, saying she gets requests like this all the time, and that it actually makes things easier to have someone familiar around. Just then, a loud voice interrupts them. A man approaches with two others, brimming with excitement, urging everyone to hurry. He asks who Yuki is, and Yuki in turn wonders if they are part of the same party. Saki explains briefly that they are volunteers who accepted the request through the guild. Lowering her voice, she adds that they joined because they want to level up efficiently by working under an S-rank adventurer. The group's leader points at Yuki and asks if he is an A-rank. Saki answers honestly that Yuki is an E-rank. Yuki awkwardly asks if that is a problem. The man explodes in disbelief, shouting that Yuki is ranked even lower than they are. His companions quickly agree, insisting that an E-rank will only slow them down and demanding that Saki remove him from the team. She ignores their complaints and calmly asks whether they forgot that Yuki conquered 2 dungeons alone recently. Yuki reflects that, technically, he was not completely alone. The volunteers scoff, saying that dungeon conquests do not matter for leveling and that investigations are what count. Their leader grows visibly irritated, admitting that he expected Saki to guide them so they could rise to A-rank easily. He complains that having a solo conqueror around would only interfere with his evaluation. Saki's patience finally wears thin. She sharply corrects him, stating that this is not a leveling mission, but an investigation, and that the dungeon itself is the target. With that, the group enters the Cave of Cloistered Desire, a B-rank dungeon. As they move inside, Saki explains that a dungeon's rank is usually determined by the boss's level. The stronger the boss, the more complex the first floor becomes, and the greater the number of floors hidden inside. As they advance, monsters begin to appear along the path, testing the party's coordination. Yuki asks how they can determine the danger level if the boss itself has never been found. Saki explains that no matter which floor explorers reach, the boss never reveals itself. The more methods it uses to conceal its presence, the more dangerous the dungeon becomes. In short, the rank is judged by the size of the first floor and the number of layers beneath it. One of the adventurers admits that the boss is so elusive that the investigation request escalated all the way to her. Suddenly, one of the volunteers shouts and charges forward, swinging his axe at a monster that bursts from the ground. The volunteers immediately start arguing over the kill, shouting for no one else to interfere. The chaotic behavior itself highlights just how dangerous the dungeon truly is. A man named Gato boasts loudly, turning to Saki and claiming he defeated the monster perfectly. She visibly tenses, already exhausted by his attitude, while Yuki quietly thinks about how difficult it must be to manage people as an S-rank. Moments later, Gato turns his attention to Yuki, mocking him openly for being an E-rank. He loudly declares that Yuki should stay back and do nothing, insisting that as long as they are here, Saki will be safe. Then his expression freezes. Behind him, a massive stone form begins to rise from the ground. Before anyone can react, several golems with glowing eyes fully emerge, surrounding the party. Terror spreads across the volunteers' faces as the scale of the threat becomes clear. Saki and Yuki immediately prepare for combat. Without hesitation, Saki leaps forward, activating one of her special techniques. Her blade flashes with light as she unleashes luminous slash, cutting through the stone creatures with overwhelming speed. The attack is so fast that Gato cannot even track it properly, left staring in shock at the cleanly shattered golems. Saki turns back sharply and warns them that she does not need their combat strength. She tells them their only job is to investigate and survive, nothing more. Yuki apologizes, explaining that he only cut the creatures so they would not get in Saki's way. The golem had been sliced into perfectly clean sections, the cuts so precise that the pieces barely shifted before collapsing. Seeing this, Saki is clearly surprised and realizes that Yuki synchronized his strike with the exact timing of her own attack. When she asks about it, Yuki simply nods, saying he acted because the situation looked dangerous. Saki finds it hard to believe that someone so new to swordsmanship could keep pace with her movements. The more she thinks about it, the more impressed she becomes, understanding that the light impact from the golem's collapse was proof of perfect coordination. With a smile, she praises Yuki, telling him he did exceptionally well and that he was a huge help. Yuki glances around the tunnel and comments on how strange it is that monsters keep emerging directly from the walls. Saki responds by instructing the volunteers to focus on investigating the dungeon and to leave the fighting entirely to her. Gat grows visibly irritated. Feeling useless, he convinces himself that finding the boss room will finally allow him to contribute something meaningful. However, 10 long hours pass, and the group remains stuck on the same floor. Saki and Yuki examine a rough map together, but no matter how they trace it, there is no clear path forward. After so much time, they still cannot find even the slightest hint of a boss chamber. Everyone is exhausted, frustration slowly building. Saki walks ahead through the corridor, deep in thought, before stopping and stating that there is no route leading to another floor. They have checked every possible direction. At that moment, Yuki places his hand against the wall and calmly asks what lies on the other side. Gat scoffs immediately, mocking Yuki and saying that it is exactly the kind of foolish question an E-rank would ask. He steps closer, using his size to intimidate him, and explains that a dungeon is not a real cave but a mana-constructed dimension. Digging into it would only result in injury from the mana layer itself. But Yuki's eye begins to glow. He calmly says that the structure does not appear to work that way. Gat stares at him in confusion, unable to understand what Yuki is implying. As the glow in Yuki's eye intensifies, the truth becomes clear to him. The wall, no, the entire cave, is made of the same material as the golems they fought earlier. It is not stone. It is clay. A massive clay golem. The moment Saki understands, she immediately orders everyone to move back. Without hesitation, she unleashes luminous slash directly at the wall. Her blade strikes head-on, and a massive explosion tears through the structure. A passage opens. Shocked but decisive, Saki shouts for everyone to move through the opening immediately. They pass through the breach and suddenly emerge into a space completely unlike anything they expected. The enclosed dungeon gives way to a vast, open desert-like area beneath an endless sky. Yuki carefully analyzes the surroundings with his enhanced vision, trying to grasp the full scope of what they are seeing. Then they look up. Towering above them is the silhouette of a colossal creature. Gat freezes in sheer terror, unable to comprehend the scale of what stands before them. Saki stares at the giant with a grave expression and delivers the truth. They were never truly inside a dungeon at all. They had been wandering inside the body of a gigantic golem that had been posing as a dungeon the entire time. Gat panics, screaming in disbelief, and demanding to know the point of such a thing. Saki answers calmly that it was done for one reason only, to deceive the dungeon ranking system. Yuki immediately understands. This is not a hidden section of a B-rank dungeon. This is the real first floor, and its actual difficulty is far higher than reported. Saki pulls out a device and shares the information she has gathered with the group. Her expression is serious as she reveals the truth. This is not the B-rank sealed cave of desire listed in the guild records. In reality, they have stepped into a massive A-rank dungeon. Worse still, it is already on the verge of evolving into an S-rank dungeon. And the situation was far more dangerous than anyone initially realized. The sheer scale of the place created the illusion that they had stepped outside the dungeon entirely. To make matters worse, a mysterious floating castle loomed far off on the horizon, radiating an ominous presence. Gato asks what the monster's duty had been, and Saki explains that the golem existed to prevent an S-rank conquest. When the big man nervously wonders whether the creature will move again, Saki shakes her head and clarifies the situation. Having failed its purpose, the golem most likely shut itself down to conserve the little mana it had left. Gato is startled by this revelation, and Saki continues, explaining that dungeons are not merely hunting grounds but the front lines against humanity's true enemies. Hearing this, Yuki recalls Liber and his servants and silently agrees. He remembers that they were intelligent, strategic beings, and that some of them even possessed emotions indistinguishable from humans. Saki says this outcome is a blessing in disguise. They managed to uncover the dungeon before it fully evolved into an S-rank threat. Because of that, they now have the opportunity to strike the core directly before the boss can hide itself again. With that conclusion reached, the investigation officially ends, and Saki announces that the dungeon conquest will now begin. She orders the volunteers to return to the guild and make their report, pointing out that the exit gate is nearby. However, Yuki immediately says he will not go back. He declares that he will fight alongside her. Saki turns to him, asking if he is truly certain about his decision. Determination fills Yuki's eyes as he meets her gaze. He asks if she is sure about bringing him along, and Saki responds that she needs someone who can carry the boss's information back if everything goes wrong. With a faint smile, she points at him and says that out of everyone there, he is the best choice. Suddenly, Saki grabs Yuki by the collar, her expression turning deadly serious. She stares straight into his eyes and warns that this time, they will return alive together, no exceptions. Yuki nods firmly in agreement, promising they will make it back safely. His thoughts drift briefly to his old family and the tragedy that claimed everyone at the orphanage. As the mark on his hand begins to glow, he swears that he will never allow someone else to die in front of him again. Without hesitation, Saki lifts Yuki and prepares to depart. Activating her luminous formula skill, she launches forward at absurd speed. Dust erupts behind them as they shoot across the terrain. Gato complains that he cannot see anything through the chaos, yet even so, he refuses to give up and shouts that there is no way he is going home like this. Along the ground, a strange glowing fragment of stone seems to guide their path. Following it, the two take the shortest route toward the floating castle they had seen earlier. With overwhelming force, Saki tears through obstacles in their way, her strikes shattering everything that blocks their advance. They finally arrive inside a massive hall and land safely upon the ground. Wings of light fade behind them as the space settles. Saki senses the overwhelming mana density and wonders aloud if this is truly the lowest floor. She admits she cannot believe humans ever reached this place on their own. The chamber before them resembles a grand throne room, filled with enormous golden crystals embedded in every surface. Suddenly, a figure made entirely of crystal appears, hanging upside down from the ceiling. The creature stares at them with a sinister smile, and Yuki instantly understands that she is the dungeon boss. The monster introduces herself as Carrot, the jewel golem, proclaiming that she will become the most beautiful demon king. Saki realizes that the boss had been secretly gathering mana all this time, and Carrot proudly confirms it. She reveals that she has been polishing her beauty little by little in order to evolve into something greater. Without delay, Carrot activates her Carrot critical cutter skill, smiling as she launches herself at the two and demands that they be enchanted by her beauty. Yuki immediately activates his demonic ice skill to analyze the incoming danger. Together, they dodge the attack, leaving Carrot momentarily surprised, as most fights usually end right there. Yuki realizes that the dungeon boss's attack speed is lethal and that a direct hit would have killed him instantly. However, compared to Vento, the jewel golem feels almost slow. Because of that, fear does not take hold of him. Carrot shouts that resistance is pointless, boasting that her body is far harder than the golems they fought earlier. Yuki agrees calmly, but grips his sword and says he only needs one thing to win. He parries her blade with precision, not to overpower her, but to create an opening. Saki instantly understands the plan and unleashes Luminous Slash once more. The attack lands cleanly, cracking Carrot's crystal blade. The jewel golem reels back in shock, unable to believe she was scratched. Saki declares that while her body may be hard, it is not unbreakable, and presses the assault relentlessly. Yuki watches the exchange in awe, realizing once again just how absurd the power of an S-rank adventurer truly is, even while injured. Carrot complains that the blow genuinely hurt, yet her expression remains composed. Saki senses something wrong. The boss has not lost her composure at all. And that can only mean one thing. She has another plan. Yuki immediately warns her not to let her guard down, and Saki responds without hesitation, fully trusting her childhood friend's instincts. With that, the swordswoman charges forward, unleashing a flowing combo meant to finish the dungeon boss once and for all. However, a wicked smile spreads across Carrot's crystal face. The jewel golem declares that she has already seen through the weakness of the two heroes. In the next instant, she activates Carrot Create Colossal, releasing an overwhelming surge of mana meant for a massive area of effect attack. Yuki senses the abnormal mana expenditure at once and realizes she has burned an enormous amount of power, yet nothing visibly changes inside the hall. For a brief moment, it seems as though the skill has failed. That illusion shatters immediately. Saki's expression twists into horror as she understands what is truly happening. Far away, Gato's panicked voice echoes as he shouts that the golem outside has regenerated and is now blocking the path to the gate. The truth becomes clear in an instant. Carrot is not attacking directly. She is absorbing the remains of the other golems and reforging them into herself. Using the stolen material, the jewel golem rapidly strengthens her body. At the same time, she traps the volunteers in glowing energy cocoons and issues a cruel ultimatum. If they are not rescued soon, they will perish. Saki instantly grasps the impossible dilemma. If she wastes time fighting Carrot, the volunteers will die. But if she takes her eyes off the boss for even a moment, the battle will be lost. In that critical moment, Yuki steps forward and draws Saki's attention. He tells her to go save the others. He explains that Carrot cannot be left unsupervised even for a single second. With his sword firmly in hand, Yuki positions himself between the jewel golem and the battlefield, declaring that he will stop her alone. Saki looks at him for a brief moment, then smiles. Without hesitation, she entrusts everything to him. She turns and runs, shouting that they will celebrate together once they all return safely. Carrot glares at Yuki with open disdain, mocking him as nothing more than a sacrificial pawn left behind. Yuki remains unmoved. To him, this is not a sacrifice. It is an act of absolute trust. He remembers how Saki believed in him without doubt. He remembers how Liber entrusted him with an impossible mission. He remembers how Vento pushed him to the brink, trusting that he would not break. Different positions, different races, different intentions, yet all of them placed their faith in the same thing. His potential, that realization steals his resolve. Because others believed in him, he must fight with everything he has to live up to that trust. Carrot recoils slightly as she senses his mana, shock flickering across her crystalline face. She questions how a human could possess power resembling that of a monster. Yuki answers with calm certainty. From this moment on, he will fight not as a mere adventurer, but as a monster tamer. With unwavering focus, he raises his sword and warns the jewel golem to prepare herself. The technique he is about to use does not belong to a human at all. It belongs to a monster far stronger than her. It belongs to Vento. Carrot recoils in shock, demanding to know how Yuki managed to cut her when her crystalline body is supposed to be nearly indestructible. Yuki calmly explains that he saw through her technique and copied her movements without any waste at all. Refusing to accept this, the dungeon boss reconstructs her weapon and activates Carrot Cure Cut, regenerating her blade into a sharper and more lethal form. She mocks him openly, claiming he will never be able to parry this version and that she will pierce him straight through. Yuki challenges her without hesitation and meets the attack head-on, confidently stating that the blade will never reach him. Carrot laughs, screaming that despite his calm demeanor, he is overflowing with openings and that she has already won. Her attack appears to strike him directly, the blade sinking into his body. Yet Yuki remains composed. He states plainly that he allowed her to hit him. The realization leaves the dungeon boss utterly stunned. In the next instant, Yuki appears behind her, his sword already in motion. He declares that he will use her own hardness against her as his strike lands. Cracks spread violently across her crystal body. At last, Carrot understands she had been used from the very beginning. The mark on Yuki's hand blazes with power as he reveals his true role as a monster tamer. Enraged, Carrot screams that she will never forgive him for defiling her crystal shell. Yuki answers calmly that this battle will not end with such shallow damage. Declaring that he will now show her a real skill, Yuki activates Curse of Class Change on Carrot. Strange words manifest across her body: compression, polishing, decoration. Her form twists and reshapes as she screams that she is the hardest and most beautiful golem, the absolute master of the dungeon. Yuki watches her transformation without fear, his gaze steady and focused. Carrot turns her attention to the trapped adventurers, sneering that she will not even bother turning them into jewels. She vows to grind Yuki down until he becomes nothing more than a grain of sand in her endless desert. Unshaken, Yuki charges forward and slashes at her massive leg. She scoffs, claiming that, just as expected, he cannot handle such an enormous crystal mass. Yuki smiles faintly and asks if simply growing larger truly counts as talent. Carrot laughs, declaring that jewels are more valuable the larger they become. Yuki corrects her. Size does not matter. What truly matters is the beauty of the cut. With that, he activates his own version of Vento's technique, Blue Flower Blade. Blood splashes across Yuki's face as his expression turns deadly serious. Carrot stares in disbelief, unable to comprehend why a human wields a skill identical to a monster's. Yuki closes his eyes and answers calmly that this is simply his own style of fighting. In an instant, countless blood-forged blades erupt from every direction, piercing Carrot's crystal body simultaneously. Her eyes reflect the overwhelming storm of crimson blades just before her form collapses completely. With a single decisive motion, Yuki shatters the dungeon boss's body. Breathing heavily, he admits that he managed to land the technique in real combat, but the burden of the skill is immense. Blood drips from his hand as he realizes just how difficult it is to use such power with his own body as the medium. Then he turns and freezes. Carrot still lives. She reveals that to survive, she discarded nearly her entire body and merged what remained, recomposing herself anew. She warns Yuki that the price he paid for power is far too great for him to endure. Yuki steadies himself, remembering that he can already see through all of her movements. Carrot charges once more, declaring that both of them have reached their limits. In response, Yuki activates Bloodflower Blade again, this time entirely in his own style. Blood spreads across his shirt, revealing the severity of his injuries. He admits that alone, he can no longer win. But he was never fighting alone. With his final plan set in motion, Yuki summons one of his contracted monsters. A small, cute bat appears at his side and immediately fills itself with blood, preparing to activate its skill. From afar, Liber and Vento observe in silence as the Demon King finally understands the strategy. Mai appears beside them and explains that the bat's skill is vampirism. Yuki's technique consumes an enormous amount of blood, and he can only maintain one contract at a time. If he fails twice, his life will be lost. Yuki confirms this calmly. The first attack used his own blood deliberately to lure Carrot into carelessness. Vento realizes that Yuki had been standing on the edge of death from the very start, and that the plan was unimaginably dangerous. By using his own weakness as bait, Yuki manipulated his opponent perfectly. Liber watches in admiration, stating that Yuki has stepped into the realm of the strongest vampires. Yuki remembers how the bat drained him during training. Now he makes that experience his weapon. Understanding everything too late, Carrot realizes that Yuki had planned this outcome from the very beginning. With the bat perched on his shoulder and his sword in hand, Yuki announces himself clearly. He is Yuki, a monster tamer, an adventurer who fights using everything available to him, enemies and allies alike. Carrot can only whisper the word monster before the final blow strikes. In a blinding flash of light, the dungeon boss is annihilated completely. Standing amid the fatting mana, Yuki declares with quiet certainty that he is human, no matter how many contracts he bears, even if one of them is with a demon king. A moment later, the dungeon's remaining mana began to surge violently, gathering at the center of the ruined chamber. Yuki felt an intense burning sensation in his eyes as the mark on his hand flared brightly. Judging the density of power, he concluded that this amount should finally be sufficient. With his body trembling from exhaustion, he prepared to absorb all the mana released by the dungeon boss's defeat, trusting that Liber's assistance would allow the process to succeed. Before he could collapse completely, Saki appeared beside him and caught him just in time. She apologized for making him wait and stared at the battlefield in disbelief. When she realized that the boss had already been defeated, she asked if he had really done it alone. Yuki apologized weakly and admitted that he could no longer stand due to severe anemia, asking her to support him for a while. The scene shifted abruptly to a large press conference hall filled with reporters and flashing cameras. On stage, a well-dressed man thanked everyone for gathering and announced that an unusual situation had occurred during the investigation of what was believed to be an E-rank dungeon. He explained that the person involved would report directly to the press. The reporters erupted instantly, shouting over one another as they rushed to capture the moment. Soon, the individual credited most for resolving the dangerous situation stepped onto the stage. Several journalists remarked that the existence of a fake dungeon alone was already headline-worthy. Moments later, Saki was introduced as the S-rank adventurer and the heroine of the mission. The crowd went wild, calling her the White Flash and bombarding her with questions about the dangers involved. One reporter asked whether intelligent monsters had appeared, considering the dungeon's true rank. Saki raised her hand to quiet the room and began summarizing the conquest. Internally, however, she complained bitterly. Yuki had once again disappeared after saying he had something important to take care of and left everything else to her. She remembered him vanishing before even finishing his healing and wondered what could possibly be so urgent that he would leave at a time like that. Deep within Liber's domain, Yuki ran through the halls and demanded to know the status of the resurrection ritual. Mai calmly replied that they were completing the final preparations to revive Elvina. Liber warned him not to stare too closely, as the ritual's power could burn his eyes, but Yuki could already feel the overwhelming energy radiating through the space. Mai held a small music box in her hands and gently addressed Elvina, telling her that her time of rest had finally ended. As the head maid, she declared that she would not allow one of their own to remain in the afterlife indefinitely. With that, she activated her maiden order, and brilliant light filled the chamber. A moment later, Elvina stirred and let out a soft sound of surprise as her consciousness returned. Yuki rushed to her side, shouting her name in relief as tears welled in his eyes. Elvina looked around in confusion, wondering why her master was standing before her. She even questioned whether Yuki had died as well, but he quickly denied it and explained that she was the one who had been brought back. Mai approached them, admitting that she had been terrified at the thought that Elvina might have sacrificed herself for nothing. Hearing this, Yuki finally allowed himself to relax, letting out a deep sigh of relief as he smiled at Elvina and told her how glad he was to see her safe and healthy again. Elvina tilted her head and asked whether that was supposed to be an undead joke, considering she was technically still a corpse. Liber appeared shortly afterward and reminded them that there was still work to be done, telling them to get changed immediately. Yuki nervously asked whether he was going to be forced into a butler outfit again, which startled Elvina. Before she could react, Vento and Mai appeared with new clothing, explaining that this time it would be different. As Yuki changed, he was surprised by the quality and design of the outfit. Vento inspected him and stated calmly that with this attire, Yuki would be the star of today's event. Placing his hand on a nearby door, the butler added that Yuki was the main guest before opening the passage. On the other side, countless monsters awaited him. They greeted Yuki warmly, thanking him for saving them from destruction. Completely overwhelmed, Yuki asked what was happening. Liber explained that the dungeon Yuki cleared had produced an enormous amount of mana, and Mai added that they had been able to revive more monsters than originally planned because of it, leaving her utterly exhausted. The Demon King admitted that he had gathered everyone simply because they were curious about the human who had made it all possible. The monsters surrounded Yuki excitedly, saying they never imagined a human would be the one to save them and insisting on celebrating. Elvina hurriedly pulled Yuki away, muttering that this situation was problematic and that even she didn't fully understand her master anymore. As he was dragged off, Yuki desperately called out to Liber for help, but the Demon King merely observed the scene with a satisfied smile, wine glass in hand. Liber finally raised his glass and declared that because of Yuki's choices in the past, all of those monsters had survived. He toasted to a job well done and suggested that Yuki should get used to receiving gratitude. Yuki shook his head, saying he hadn't done it for them and that his reasons were different. As his eye glowed faintly, Yuki realized that Elvina reminded him of another girl from his past. He looked around at the creatures who had been saved by his decision to fight with everything he had. Memories of the orphanage surfaced, of laughter, warmth, and the tragedy that had taken everything from him and Saki. Clenching his fist, Yuki reaffirmed his resolve. He would never allow that kind of tragedy to repeat itself again. Even so, a small smile formed on his face as he acknowledged that, this time, they had been saved. Nearby, a werewolf asked Elvina why she had perished despite being Vento's best disciple. Liber replied that Vento simply needed more training, while the butler grew irritated as the Demon King teased him for clearly favoring Yuki. Liber laughed and admitted that he himself had taken quite an interest in the boy as well. He confessed that at first he intended to use Yuki, but in the end, it was Yuki who used them all to achieve results far beyond what anyone had anticipated. With a dangerous glint in his eyes, the Demon King concluded that this human would become the key to shaping the future of their world. Back at the press conference, Saki frowned and asked for a question to be repeated, certain she had heard something alarming. A mysterious man suddenly stood and demanded that she hand over the person who had actually cleared the dungeon. Saki's eyes burned with fury as she realized he knew the truth. The man warned her that she was hiding someone extremely dangerous and declared that he would personally take Yuki away. The scene shifted to a dark, narrow alley where a brutal struggle had just ended. A man lay on the ground, barely conscious, as a cell phone slipped from his trembling hand and clattered onto the pavement. The screen briefly lit up, displaying news footage from the press conference, before a boot came crashing down and shattered it completely. The injured man screamed desperately that the person the attacker was searching for had come together with Saki. The figure standing over him, cloaked in a red hood, clicked his tongue in irritation and complained that he was exhausted from dealing with so many low-rank adventurers. Panicking, the man searched his memory and finally shouted out the name. The moment he said Yuki, the hooded attacker froze. Later, standing before a panel of gathered information and photographs, the man in red located Yuki's image and confirmed it without hesitation. The wounded adventurer begged for his life, swearing that he had nothing to do with it, but flames had already begun to gather around him. The attacker coldly dismissed his pleas, stating that loose tongues only caused trouble and that the truth spreading would be inconvenient. He told the man to blame himself for speaking too much. The next instant, a massive explosion of fire consumed the alley, leaving no chance for escape. Elsewhere, Yuki walked peacefully through a public park, holding a bouquet of flowers in his hands. It felt strange to be surrounded only by ordinary people again, far removed from monsters, dungeons, and bloodshed. He decided to take a brief break from training and distance himself from the monster world, even if only for a day. With the flowers held carefully against his chest, Yuki affirmed that today was meant for visiting those who mattered most. Soon, he arrived at a large memorial built to honor the victims of a dungeon collapse that had occurred years ago. The monument stood as a reminder of the tragedy known as the Great Collapse, where countless lives had been lost. As he stood there, Yuki reflected on how much had changed since then, how he had become an adventurer, cleared dungeons, trained with a sword, and walked paths he never imagined. He was preparing himself to meet the people waiting at the memorial when he noticed someone crouching ahead. For a moment, he wondered if Saki had come here as well. The figure turned around. It was a man Yuki had never met before. With a relaxed smile, the stranger said that he had been waiting for him. He introduced himself as Zapper, an A-rank adventurer, and claimed that they worked in the same line of business. Yuki found it strange and pointed out that they had never met, but Zapper merely greeted him casually. Zapper then revealed his purpose. He had come to recruit Yuki. Yuki was stunned and immediately replied that he was still only E-rank. Zapper, however, casually mentioned the clearing of the fake dungeon, causing Yuki's body to stiffen instantly. With a sharp gaze, the man said there was no longer any need to hide his involvement. Yuki's mind raced. If people discovered the truth about his abilities, it would cause serious problems. He remembered deliberately asking Saki to take the credit so she could rank up without scrutiny. Trying to remain calm, Yuki claimed that he had only helped evacuate other adventurers. Zapper didn't believe him. With a faint smile, he stated that it was actually the White Flash who had destroyed the golem in seconds. Yuki was shocked. He hadn't realized how closely the man had investigated the event. It became clear that Zapper knew Yuki possessed the strength to defeat an A-rank dungeon boss. Zapper continued, saying he didn't understand why Yuki was hiding. Dungeon clearing wasn't like ordinary work, and weak pawns were useless. To make real money, one needed the strongest weapons available. No, the strongest weapons in the world. Yuki grew confused and asked if Zapper was referring to him as such a weapon. The man stepped closer and explained that even with powerful skills, clearing dungeons alone had limits. In a party, things were different. Even if rewards were split, the overall gains were far greater. With clenched fists, Zapper declared that together they could conquer far more dangerous dungeons. He invited Yuki to join him. Yuki thanked him for the offer and for valuing him in such a strange way, but he calmly refused. He explained that his goal wasn't money. Zapper sighed, clearly uninterested in the rejection. He admitted he wasn't good with words and said he had already expected this outcome. A red magic circle suddenly formed beneath his feet as his expression shifted. Now he said it was time for brute force. Yuki was shocked that magic was being activated openly in a city park. Zapper attacked immediately, conjuring a massive fire hammer that sent Yuki flying across the ground. The bouquet fell from his hands and burst into flames as it hit the grass. Yuki staggered to his feet and demanded to know why Zapper would use magic in a place meant for people to rest in peace. Zapper merely laughed and said that Yuki dodging the attack only made him want him more. Stone chains erupted from the ground and wrapped tightly around Yuki, pinning him in place. Zapper mocked him, saying that while he was strong against monsters, he was weak against other humans. Trapped, Yuki struggled and activated an ice prison, freezing the hand restraining him. Zapper clicked his tongue and remarked that Yuki truly was his opposite, someone made to clear dangerous dungeons. He slammed Yuki into the ground and shouted that this was exactly why he wanted him. With a malicious grin, Zapper threatened to follow Yuki into every dungeon he entered and attack him again and again. He boasted that even if Yuki called the guild or S-ranks, it wouldn't matter. He was a skilled killer and no one could stop him. Leaving Yuki battered on the ground, Zapper said he would wait before delivering Yuki's end. From afar, Liber observed the entire encounter. His expression darkened as irritation filled his gaze. The Demon King muttered that Zapper's attempt to steal his pawn was extremely rude and glared at the board, as if the man were nothing more than a misplaced chess piece. Back at the monster base, Yuki sat with Mai, admitting that he needed to come up with a plan to win. Vento questioned why he hadn't brought his sword, and Yuki explained that it had been his day off. Even so, he admitted that he likely would have lost regardless and needed a way to counter magic users. Liber appeared and reminded him calmly that he was a monster tamer and had more options than he realized. He advised Yuki to rely on creatures proficient in magic. Understanding immediately, Yuki summoned one. An elf named Makina Mura appeared, clearly annoyed and complaining that she had been pulled away from important research. Yuki thought to himself that no one understood magic better than her. Liber then ordered Makina to begin studying the abyss. The elf let out a long sigh, clearly unhappy with the assignment. Already on her personal floor within the dungeon, Makina was shocked that the boy was Vento's finest disciple, and she made it very clear that she didn't actually like the old man. Yuki quickly realized that he had never once seen her attending the tea parties or gatherings with the other monsters. The elf scoffed and said she would never attend an event hosted by that ancient man bound with traditional etiquettes, leaving Yuki confused. When she clarified that ancient meant roughly 1,000 years old, Yuki nearly choked on the number. Makina immediately corrected him, stating she was only 1,499 years old. Yuki silently decided that the difference hardly mattered. With a clenched fist, Makina declared that she would raise Vento's disciple into someone even stronger than the master himself. She stepped closer to Yuki and smirked, saying that his former teacher would absolutely hate to see it. For a brief moment, she began fantasizing about a forbidden bond between them, but Yuki cut her off immediately and bluntly asked her to teach him magic instead. Surprisingly, she agreed. She said it sounded fun, and magic development required proper stimulation anyway. When they entered a massive library, Yuki stopped in his tracks, stunned by the sight. Endless shelves stretched beyond his vision, packed tightly with books. He asked if all of them were about magic. Makina casually replied that there were even more elsewhere, explaining that almost her entire floor consisted solely of ancient magical texts. She proudly called him her first disciple and added that he didn't even understand what real magic was yet. Without wasting time, she began the lesson by asking her first question: what was the difference between magic and skills? Yuki thought about it seriously. It was something he had never clearly distinguished before. Makina explained that skills were personal abilities, while magic was universal. Seeing his confusion, she broke it down further. Skills were divided into 3 types. The first were profession-based skills, like Yuki's demonic eye. The second were racial skills, such as the bat's vampirism. The third were skills born from techniques mastered through experience and talent. She emphasized that these depended entirely on the individual. Even if 2 skills appeared similar, their essence was different, making true imitation impossible. When she asked if Yuki had ever experienced this, he fell silent for a moment. He remembered reshaping the bloodflower blade into his own fighting style. After that pause, he answered that he understood completely, and that magic must be the opposite of that. Makina nodded, confirming his conclusion. With the same magic, the same power, and the same structure, the result would always be identical no matter who cast it. Magic was a universal law, absolute and impartial to all beings. A faint glow formed at her fingertip, as she declared that this was what true magic meant. Excited, Yuki felt like something finally clicked, but another question quickly surfaced in his mind. Makina moved on to the second question before he could ask it himself. Why didn't everyone use magic? Yuki guessed it must have strict conditions or massive mana costs. Makina shook her head with a troubled expression and said the real answer was simpler. It was extremely difficult. He assumed the difficulty lay in mana manipulation, but she corrected him again. The real problem was reciting spells properly. Original magic required incantations as long as entire books. Yuki immediately recalled Zapper trapping him with stone chains using only a short chant. He admitted that he had never seen anyone recite something so long, as spells were usually cast instantly. Makina smiled and posed the third question: how did mages actually cast their spells? After thinking carefully, Yuki guessed that they must use some form of aid. She confirmed his answer, explaining that mages relied on tools such as staves, magic circles, or internalized chanting to simplify casting. Yuki felt a surge of excitement as he realized magic could be modified in countless ways. Makina demonstrated by summoning a powerful fire hammer using an extremely short incantation. She explained that this technique was called incantation emission, where the entire spell was processed mentally. Though it was a basic skill, the result depended entirely on the caster's understanding. She added that over time, every mage developed their own way of processing spells. Yuki immediately recognized the similarity to the magic Zapper had used in the park and finally understood why identical spells could produce different results. Continuing, Makina explained that once you understood how to forge a spell, what you created wasn't just fire or force, it was invasion itself. She demonstrated again, forming the fire hammer with precise control. She explained that by leaving parts of a spell incomplete, a mage could fill in the rest later. Yuki, thrilled, said he finally understood magic and asked if memorizing the incantation was enough. Makina handed him a book but warned that memorization alone would limit him forever. A spell was a command, and without understanding each part, new magic could never be created. Yuki compared it to learning a new language and complained that he was already terrible at calculus. Makina told him that humans lacked time and that he should be grateful for her assistance. Then she cast a spell called Live in the library. A massive magic circle appeared beneath them, making Yuki tense as sweat rolled down his face. In the next instant, he found himself standing in a world engulfed in flames. Shocked, he demanded to know where they were. Makina explained that the spell allowed him to experience the contents of a book directly. This was the world of her text, and if he cleared the virtual dungeon, he would learn everything inside. Holding his sword, Yuki relaxed slightly and said this method suited him much better. With a confident smile, he added that he was far better at fighting than studying, only for his eyes to widen as countless enemies appeared around him. Makina warned him that today's lesson would cover basic attributes and transformations. When two massive snakes emerged, Yuki asked if she seriously expected him to clear all of this. Makina smiled and challenged him, asking if he planned to call the task impossible. As a dark creature charged at him with overwhelming force, Yuki tightened his grip on his sword and answered with a calm, confident refusal. From there, Yuki unleashed a powerful blue slash from his sword, the attack tearing straight through the incoming creatures. Makina watched from the side with a satisfied, though slightly surprised, smile. Yuki's eyes glowed in shifting colors as he declared that he would finish everything in an instant. 3 days passed, and the brutal training continued deep within Makina Machura's dungeon floor. Inside the simulated world, a massive griffin-like creature released a deafening screech before charging forward at terrifying speed. Yuki immediately began reciting a spell to interfere with its wind attribute, but the monster was far faster than expected. A violent gust slammed into him mid-incantation. Even so, Yuki stubbornly continued chanting, attempting to transform scattered dust into stars and bind the target. At last, the spell activated. But instead of trapping the griffin, Yuki found himself caught in his own magic and slammed to the ground. Makina stared down at him and coldly remarked that her so-called disciple number 1 had absolutely zero talent. Lying there, Yuki finally understood why most adventurers avoided incantation magic in real combat. Makina explained that magic was never meant for direct fighting. It was meant for deceiving reality itself and rewriting the world's rules. Yuki pushed himself back to his feet, reflecting that he had already learned fire, earth, water, ice, and even lightning spells. With so many attributes mastered, he believed the magic he wielded should be powerful. Testing that belief, he attempted to cast a stone arrow without completing the full incantation. The result was laughable, a tiny, pathetic shard that dropped to the ground without even scratching the floor. Yuki stared at it in disbelief. Makina reminded him that she had warned him already. Shortcuts always came at a cost. Magic spells were commands, and the more pieces you omitted, the weaker the final result became. She added that he was terrible at compensating for missing incantation elements through imagination. Yuki realized the truth. He simply lacked raw magical talent. He clenched his fist, thinking that even if he used full incantations to gain real power, he would never be fast enough to defeat Zapper. He remembered how the man's magic activated instantly, leaving no room to react or counter. Makina warned him that situations where one attribute failed to overcome another would continue endlessly. With that, she forced him into training with the wind attribute, pushing him headfirst into another trial. As Yuki ran, he wondered if perhaps there was at least one attribute he could truly excel at. But a darker thought followed. Did Zapper even have a weakness to exploit at all? Elsewhere, inside a dungeon camp, a group of adventurers rested around a fire. Zapper listened with interest as one of them reported that Yuki had entered an S-rank dungeon alone. Another confirmed it, adding that they couldn't find him anywhere else and that he had gone straight into that infamous place. Someone recalled that even a party of 2 A-rank adventurers had been forced to retreat from that dungeon. Zapper nodded thoughtfully, admitting that it was a smart choice. Few adventurers would dare follow him there. When asked what they should do next, Zapper replied calmly that it didn't matter. They were going in. One of the men grew tense, warning that they still had monsters to deal with and that the dungeon was extremely dangerous. Zapper smiled wickedly and agreed. Yes, it could be very dangerous, especially for them. Before anyone could respond, a massive worm-like monster burst from the ground. Panic erupted as screams filled the air. Another giant beast appeared immediately after, releasing a terrifying roar. Zapper remained completely unfazed. He raised his finger like a gun and released a devastating spell infused with multiple attributes at once. The monsters were annihilated instantly. Clicking his tongue, Zapper complained that he had killed too many again and that they wouldn't get good materials this time. Even so, the others were stunned by the sheer perfection of his incantation emission. They finally understood this was the true power of an A-rank mage, no, a first-class mage. Zapper stated that S-rank dungeons were dangerous, which meant they needed to find Yuki quickly. When someone shouted that the earlier collapse had injured several party members, Zapper dismissed it entirely. He said those were replaceable B-ranks and not worth wasting magic on. Without sparing a glance at the wounded, he turned and walked away. Back in Makina's library world, Yuki suddenly felt a creeping sense of malice approaching him. Makina watched him sprawled on the floor with pure boredom and disappointment, stating bluntly that he truly had no talent for magic. Yuki groaned, admitting that he couldn't omit even a single incantation properly. Even Makina seemed momentarily shocked by how badly he had failed. She told him that if he couldn't handle major attributes, then minor ones like insects were a lost cause entirely. Yuki replied calmly that he had still learned a lot, even if his talent was lacking. He admitted he hadn't expected to be this bad, but said they would have to make do. That was the wrong answer. Makina exploded in anger, shouting that he had no right to speak as if he understood magic after failing so thoroughly. Yuki tried to explain that for every spell, he had deliberately attempted something different. He added that their training hadn't even reached the first real stage yet. They hadn't even started warming up. That statement made Makina freeze. Her expression shifted. excitement lighting her eyes as she declared that magic existed to rewrite the world and crush injustice itself. With a deadly serious tone, she warned that she would never tolerate compromise or surrender. Yuki, confused, asked how he was supposed to do that if he had no talent for normal magic. Makina smiled. She told him the answer was simple, and that he had already done something similar once before against the old bat. With a confident grin, Makina told him to create his own magic, a spell that only he could use in this world. She declared that it was time for applied magic and that his studies were more than sufficient. Yuki stared at her, realization slowly dawning. He asked if she meant he should create a new magic, one he was actually good at, instead of forcing himself to use magic he wasn't suited for. With a playful smile, the elf winked and told Yuki that this was exactly what he needed to do if he wanted to win. She explained that it was the complete opposite of activating magic through chanting. Instead of relying on words, he had to use mana purely by feel. Yuki fell silent, deeply thinking about the idea of altering the world simply through sensation and intent. Makina continued, explaining that in real combat, this kind of magic was the most practical form possible. But before she could finish, Yuki suddenly interrupted her. With a focused expression, Makina raised her hand and began casting a powerful water spell. A translucent sphere of water formed in front of her, creating an aqua vision. Inside the sphere, an image appeared. It showed Zapper on a lower level of the dungeon, unleashing a massive fire wave. With a wicked grin, the villain muttered about finding where Yuki was hiding. Activating Wind Search, he shouted Yuki's name, determined to track him down. Yuki froze in shock at the sight and asked why Zapper was inside the dungeon. Makina smiled calmly and said this was perfect. The villain had followed him exactly as expected, but instead of relief, panic surged through Yuki at the thought. Ignoring his fear, Makina told him firmly to handle this situation with magic, not summoning. She activated a spell called Shine Draft, and a glowing magic circle appeared beneath Yuki's feet. The sight reminded him of a ritual he had once seen, where multiple people were trapped inside a spell formation. Bluish energy wrapped around Yuki's body, and in the next instant, space twisted. He was transported to a ruined battlefield. Moments later, Zapper appeared as well, glancing around with interest. He chuckled and wondered aloud if Makina had deliberately chosen an easy battlefield for them. Slowly approaching, he said that just as he thought, Yuki had been hiding his power all along. With a mocking smile, Zapper asked again what Yuki's answer was to his earlier proposal. Yuki didn't reply with words. Instead, he raised his hand and cast Cold Break Javelin. A sharp spear of ice shot toward the enemy at full speed. Landing firmly with his sword drawn, Yuki prepared himself for the next exchange. Zapper laughed and said there was no need for an answer. He could already see rebellion burning in Yuki's eyes. To defend himself, Yuki cast Stone Shell, forming a rock shield around his body. He swung his sword with precision, destroying wave after wave of ice projectiles that Zapper fired at him. In a single motion, Yuki shattered all the incoming attacks. Zapper whistled in admiration, commenting that Yuki even had talent as a swordsman. Suddenly, the ground beneath Yuki's feet softened. A pool of mud formed instantly, binding his legs in place. Zapper had activated Mudbind. Yuki was shocked. The spell skipped the creation phase entirely. It was even faster than chantless casting. Zapper scoffed, mocking him for thinking he could interfere with the same magic trapping him. Without hesitation, the villain cast Windhammer, smashing Yuki and sending him flying. Yuki crashed to the ground, pain exploding through his body. Blood trickled from his face as Zapper looked down on him, declaring that Yuki still relied on incantations and that his magic was nothing special. Lying there, Yuki understood the truth. He couldn't win a battle of incantations. Slowly standing up, he realized he had only one option left, to create an entirely new kind of magic. Zapper noticed the change in Yuki's eyes and commented that they were the eyes of someone plotting something dangerous. As the villain began casting another spell, Yuki charged forward with everything he had. He thought about magic itself. Magic was a miracle, an act of altering the world's universal laws. That was why spells required long explanations. But if someone truly understood those laws, the unnecessary parts could be discarded. Yuki focused completely, his eyes glowing intensely as he poured every ounce of concentration into shaping his own spell. Zapper stepped forward confidently, reaching out with a cruel smile. Suddenly, a massive bolt of lightning crashed down, striking both of them and blasting Zapper backward. Yuki spoke through heavy breathing. For him, it was natural to have a magic he alone could use. He said that miracles had never saved him, not once, so he had no choice but to create his own. His mind flashed back to the orphanage. He remembered praying desperately, yet no miracle ever came. Everyone he loved was gone. A powerful rock attack slammed into him, but the memory burned stronger than the pain. He saw the orphanage in flames and screamed that not a single person had survived that day. Fueled by that memory, Yuki lunged at Zapper through a storm of flying debris. Their powers collided, causing a massive explosion that engulfed the battlefield in smoke and shattered stone. Within the dust cloud, Zapper stood calmly, until his eyes widened in shock. Something was wrong. Staring at the battlefield, he struggled to understand what had happened to Yuki. Sword in hand, Yuki thought bitterly that there were no miracles. Magic itself made no sense to him. Exhausted, he admitted he couldn't understand that so-called miracle he had witnessed before. Then a voice called him number 1. Startled, Yuki looked around, only to see a small version of Makina appear beside him, created through her own magic. He complained that she had just been watching, but the elf replied that was exactly why she could guide him. She said that in terms of knowledge, Yuki was already a first-class mage capable of altering anything. She told him to let his emotions explode and pour all his mana into a spell. Yuki realized that if magic was based on feelings, then he had more than enough. He thought about miracles again and how magic had never saved him. The only emotion he truly felt toward it was anger, deep, overwhelming anger. He accepted it. In this senseless world, he realized he could have been angrier long ago. And now, he finally released everything he had sealed away. Zapper found him again and asked if he was ready to give up. Yuki said nothing. He simply extended his hand. Zapper prepared another chantless spell, then unleashed a massive firestorm, shouting that no magic could rival his own. But inside the flames, Yuki moved. With his sword, he cut straight through the fire itself. Zapper burst into laughter, then froze as his magic failed to reach its target. His smile vanished as he stared in disbelief, wondering what kind of magic followed a path opposite to its caster. From afar, Makina watched with amusement, calling Yuki a child with no teaching value, yet clearly pleased. With a wink, she said this was good magic. Dark purple energy wrapped around Yuki's body as he spoke calmly. He revealed that his new technique was called anti-magic. Looking straight at Zapper, Yuki warned him that this was his magic.